I've kind of given up on trying to see,
legacy acts in big arenas and stuff like that. Number one,
legacy acts in big arenas and stuff like that. Number one, Ticketmaster, don't even want to go there, but not good. And if I can pay $15-20 to go see a local artist that I can literally shake their hand afterwards and say, hey, great job, and you did a great show and everything. And that for me is much more fulfilling. And if a lot of people heard about this person, no, they have a small fan base, but they're making a living being a musician, which I'm incredibly envious of.
Cambrian Explosion.
Hey, Neel. In the last podcast, we were talking a lot about your love for music and your experiences over the years, and we really enjoyed it. How did you develop this Song Talk community? Tell us a little bit how that happened and where you're at now with that.
So for me, the love for music has always been there from the beginning. I can't really explain where that came from exactly. It was just one of those things in middle school where it was like, who wants to be in band? Okay, let me try this. It sounds like fun. And kind of took off from there. But the songwriting community for me goes back to about 2010 when I was just at a point in my life where I was kind of resetting my life, and I wanted to, I was just looking at, reaching out and meeting some other people with common interests and that sort of thing. And someone had said to me, have you ever heard of meetup.com? I said, oh, no, I've never heard of meetup.com. What's that? And they said, meetup.com is a website where you go and, you sign up for an event and then you go meet people in real life. And it's like, oh, okay, internet becoming real life. Fancy that. And so obviously one of the first things I looked for was musicians or songwriting or something akin to that. And so I joined as a member to the at the time it was called the Songwriters Cafe. It took place at the host's apartment, and it was the same sort of thing. We just went around the room and everyone shared a song and everyone gave each other feedback on it. So that's where the kind of thing happened. It was actually run by a producer who's since a few years after that meetup started, he moved back home to Guelph as a producer, and at the time, his partner at the time was sort of managing the meetup, and she asked a few of us that were kind of regular members at the meetup, and we're always going to all the events. She asked us if we'd like to take over hosting the meetup, and so me and a couple of my friends, we all said yes, and so we took turns hosting the meetup, and then. What happened out of that is that a couple of years later, we heard from that manager, again, who was sort of behind the scenes, and she was just sort of managing the thing, that someone, an alumni, I think, at the time it was Ryerson University. Now it's, of course, Toronto Metropolitan University. So someone at Ryerson had been to our meetup and was also aware that the radio station at Ryerson University was being resurrected, because it was there before, but then wasn't. And so it was being resurrected. They were looking for programming, and they thought that our meetup might make an interesting radio program. And so sent a message to our meetup manager. We never actually ever met the person who was the member. We have no idea who that was, who recommended us. But so we met with the radio station people at CJRU 1280 AM at the time, and submitted recorded a little demo at one of our places, like a little 15-minute, just conversation about songwriting. Okay, that's cool. And then we submitted that, and they were like, yeah, sounds great. And gave us a slot on Tuesday nights. So we went into the radio station all the time, and each week, and then developed the podcast out of that. So that's where it kind of grew. It kind of was born at the meetup, but then kind of took off on its own thing. And then we rebranded the podcast we called Song Talk Radio. And so then we rebranded the Songwriters Cafe to be, actually for a while we called it the Songwriters Meetup, and then we changed it to the Song Talk Meetup. So we have the Song Talk Radio and the Song Talk Meetup. Soon we'll have the Song Talk lunch boxes and the flamethrower.
I'm working for the flamethrower.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how has your
like when you started, and I've seen the format of Song Talk, the meetup, and then I've heard this format of Song Talk, the podcast, and there is some difference in between the two. So how has both of those evolved? And I wasn't part of the songwriting circles, the original meetup. So the songwriting cafe, I believe that's what you said its name was.
Mm-hmm.
So how has the format of these things evolved, and why is it different, and why do you keep it different?
Well, it's different because they are essentially different things. One's an event. The meetup is really for anybody, and anyone can show up, anyone can share a song, and it kind of doesn't matter. We have a little bit more scrutiny on the podcast. So when the podcast started, our meetup was really our only resource for finding guests. So we started inviting everybody from meetup and said, "Hey, you want to be on our podcast? Want to be on our podcast?" And we just, and I'll be honest, we picked the people from the meetup who we thought, could talk about their songs, because they expressed themselves sort of well at the meetup, and they were good participants and stuff like that, and they were good songwriters. And so we started out that way. And at some point, a few years into it, we also invited people. Like I would go to open mics and just hang out or whatever, and see somebody on stage and be like, "Hey, I run a podcast. Would you like to be on it?" Sure. Everyone's usually pretty receptive to that idea. And so we got a few people that way, and it grew. And then a few years later, somehow, I'm not even sure exactly how this happened, we got on the email distribution list for publicists. So the publicists are people that work with songwriters and performers and artists to publicize their latest release, or they're doing a tour, or they're whatever's going on event wise in an artist's career. They go to the publicist and say, "We'd like to sort of advertise this," and the publicist then sends it out to radio stations, to bloggers, to magazines, to podcasts, to all these places that may want to interview the artist. So the last several years now, most of our guests end up coming from, because we have relationships now with a few different publicists who are constantly sending us stuff, and sometimes repeat artists. So we see an artist a year later, 6 months after they were on the podcast, we see them again. And of course, the format changed. The format changed actually a couple of times. So when we started the podcast, the radio station gave us a half-hour slot, as they do with every show. You get a half-hour slot. So at the beginning, because we were afraid that we were going to run out of things to talk about, which was totally an unfounded fear. But in any case, when we started it, we're like, we better have enough to talk about. So we ended up inviting 2 songwriters on the show, and each of them would share a song in each half of the show. And then we would all give each other feedback on the songs and talk about them and everything. And we very, very quickly realized that half an hour sped by super fast. And the whole idea of us running out of things to talk about was completely unfounded. And if anything, we had to cut off the show at half an hour with so many things left to talk about.
Yeah, so, time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly. Time flies when you're having fun. And that was the end of it. So we proposed to the radio station, can we please have an hour slot? Like we're running out of things. We're running out of time before we finish the conversations. Can we please have an hour? Great. And as well, even before that, we said, okay, forget the 2 songwriters thing. Let's just get one guest on the show, have them talk about their songwriting for one full half hour. Still, we ran out of time, so we asked for an hour. And then when we got a guest on to bring 3 songs over the course of an hour, and that worked really well for a while. There were 3 of us hosting. We had an additional person doing live social media on Twitter as we were talking. It's like, "Oh, Neel said this about the song, blah blah blah," and links and all that sort of stuff. And we did that, and a Facebook Live stream at the beginning of the show. And so we had, and we also had another person. At one point we had 2 extra people doing social media. She was also doing our administration, like doing all our booking of guests and keeping our schedule on task, and minutes for meetings and that sort of thing. And that's the other thing we started fairly early on, is a weekly phone call meeting, or over Zoom or something like that. At the time, there was no Zoom. A phone call meeting at least, just to talk about what's happening in the upcoming week. Are we all set for the guests coming next week? All that sort of stuff, just to get our ducks in a row. And so after we got the hour slot, 3 songs for the songwriter to share, and often they would play them live, so we'd also video record them, put them on our YouTube channel, and do the whole bit. And we also had a dedicated tech person for a lot of the time. They would run the mixing board to make sure everything sounded good. So we had a whole team at one point. Now it's very much reduced. I'll get to that. And then for the hour thing, that went on for a few years. And then we eventually decided, let's just do 2 songs for the hour, because often, again, we were running out of things, and the third song would often get shortchanged because we'd be rushing it at the end to get it in the last 10 minutes of the episode, whereas we've spent a good ample time on the first 2 songs. We said, okay, we'll just get the third song. We'll have the guest bring 2 songs. We'll talk about one in the first half, one in the second half. We'll be good, and that worked for a good long time. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. So after the pandemic, we were left in the lurch for a couple of weeks trying to figure out what the heck we were going to do. And eventually we decided, okay, we'll do the thing on Zoom. We'll invite the guest to come on Zoom. And at that point, because we were kind of not beholden to the hour slot on the radio station where we had to be broadcasting live for an hour, now we're pre-recording, so we can just upload it to the radio station, upload it to our own streams, do whatever we want with it. Sometimes the show went over, and sometimes the show was under an hour. So it was a little bit, it morphed a little bit in that sense.
Before, when you were doing the radio station show, was it in person? You had the guests come in person and do the show?
Yes, the person had to be in Toronto on the day of in order to come into the studio. And we would give them the option. You can play your song live with a guitar or with a piano. You got to bring in your own instrument, your own amplification, whatever. Or you can bring in recordings, and we'll just play back the recordings. It was cool either way, and we got a good mix of both. Once we went on Zoom, over 95% of them provide recordings because it's difficult to perform live over Zoom. We've had it a couple of times, and a couple of times it's worked really well. A couple of times it's been kind of iffy. So, we do get a lot of recordings now. And then, and as well, before we had 3 co-hosts, now we're down to 2 co-hosts. It's just me and my friend Phil. Now we're the original founders, and we've been there since day one. And so nowadays we're actually trying to keep it down to about half an hour to 40 minutes ish.
Yeah. I find that people's attention span is also reduced nowadays, right?
I think that's part of it for sure. And I've always, me personally, I've been kind of a fan of longer form content at times. Sometimes I do like the 20-minute podcast, I'll be honest, right? But sometimes I like the deep dives for 90 minutes, that really is kind of cool. So now we're trying to keep it half an hour, 1 song. But of course, the most amazing thing about going on Zoom now is that the guest does not have to be in Toronto anymore. They can be anywhere, literally anywhere. And so we've had a lot of guests from the US, a lot of guests from across Canada. We've had a few times from England, a couple of times we've had people from Australia. It's been really, really opened up, and especially since our publicists too work a lot with American artists and everything. So we've really opened up the sphere.
It was a mixed blessing in a way.
In a lot of ways. I mean, there is that wonderfulness about seeing someone perform their song live right in front of you, like 2 feet away in the same room, So I do kind of miss that. And of course, after the radio show recording, we'd always go hang out at the pub or at the coffee shop or whatever, and just sort of, hang out and chat and stuff like that afterwards with the guests and with each other. So we do kind of, once the Zoom is off, we kind of do that. But other things we do for the podcast. So my partner Phil, he set up our website, and he set up all the connections to Spotify and to iTunes and Amazon and all the Google and all the different podcast directories. So we set up that. So all we have to do is publish the web page, and it automatically goes to all those places. I actually handle the video part of it, so I'll take the Zoom recording, and often I'll when the podcast ends, sometimes the guest leaves, and then Phil and I are just chatting about stuff. So sometimes I'll leave that on for the video. So when we upload to our YouTube channel, you get like the post-credit scene where we're just riffing on stuff, which is kind of fun sometimes. Most of the times I include it, sometimes I don't. It depends on what we talked about. If we get into more personal stuff that maybe we don't want to reveal to cut that out. But sometimes we're just, riffing about something in our studios or something, songwriting or some news we heard or something like that. If we didn't include it in the episode proper, we put it in the outtakes kind of thing.
So I think Nabil wanted to ask you also, Nabil, about any very cool, young, interesting singer-songwriters that you've come across in Toronto.
Yeah, I mean,
that may or may not be in this podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean,
in this room with us now.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage you guys to talk to any of these people. I'm gonna point out. I mean, back in the day, my wife actually wanted to see this young singer-songwriter who was exploding on Instagram at the time, I think. And she was doing like these cutesy little cover songs with an indie folk vibe and stuff like that. And we went to go see her in concert, and there was an opening act. This guy, young fellow named Braden Mitchell, who was incredible, amazing guitar player, but not like egotistical about it at all, and an extraordinary songwriter and a great singer and everything. And he was just up there on acoustic guitar, but it was just like, wow, like really compelling songs. And of course I talked to him afterwards. I said, hey, can you want to come on a podcast? And he's been on the podcast like a few times, and of course bought his CD and everything, so I would definitely recommend him. We've had some extraordinary young people on the podcast. We've had teenagers, like there was one artist named Jules. I think she's out of Guelph or Waterloo or something like that. And at 14, she was 14 going on 30. Like she was writing really mature songs, old soul in a young body kind of thing, one of those kind of people. And it's just incredible to see how much she's grown. There was I'm not big into jazz pop, but we had a guest named Avery Raquel. I think she's from Southwestern Ontario as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe she's in Toronto. I'm not entirely sure. Seen her in concert a couple of times. And just an incredible songwriter. Very young, but again, old soul, great lyrics, great production, everything. Just really incredible. There's another artist I became a fan of, Alex Worms, WHORMS. She's a music educator as well, and she's actually in an old school folk cover band as well, with another one of my favorite artists that have been on the podcast that I met even before we started the podcast, named Jacob Moon. He's an artist from Hamilton. Incredible guitar looper, incredible singer. He's an educator. He's been on our podcast a number of times. Great songwriter. And him and Alex Worms, they actually combined forces. They're both from Hamilton. They combined forces and created this band where they sing songs by Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, all these old folk songs, and put their own vibe on it and stuff like that. And they've been touring around Ontario and beyond and stuff. And
so we have a lot of Canadian talent that the world doesn't always see.
No, yeah, exactly. A lot of Canadians. I've become a fan of a few artists from the U.S. As well. There's one fellow from North Carolina or so. I think North Carolina. He's from Raleigh, named Gilbert Neel, who for me kind of ticks all the boxes because he's a great songwriter. He's got a little bit of progressive rock in there, which I'm a big fan of. He's got a real good rock, funky attitude and interesting lyrics, and musically very and complex enough without being like too cerebral, So I've become a big fan of his. Never met him in real life. And also we, as far as even in terms of like music education, we over the pandemic we connected with this group from Minnesota, called the At Home Songwriting. Nabil, you're a part of that group as well, right? Run by this fellow Chad Shank, who's from Minneapolis, and he's actually teaching now alongside Pat Pattison at Berkeley School online, teaching lyrics. And he's a great songwriter himself, and he runs this amazing uh, online community, runs songwriting challenges. He has a great YouTube channel with lots of great educational content for songwriters. And he's constantly churning out stuff, and it's just really high quality, and it's great to see him. The other thing for me personally is that over the last 10 years, 15 years at this point, I've really discovered a lot of local talent, right? And I've kind of given up on trying to see, legacy acts in big arenas and stuff like that. Number one, Ticketmaster, don't even want to go there, but not good. And if I can pay 15, $20 to go see a local artist that I can literally shake their hand afterwards and say, hey, great job, and you did a great show and everything. And that for me is much more fulfilling. And if a lot of people heard about this person, no, they have a small fan base, but they're making a living being a musician, which I'm incredibly envious of. And but they're putting in the work, and they teach on the side, and they do other things, sync licensing for music for film and TV and stuff like that, in addition to being a singer-songwriter or leading a rock band or something like that. But like it's amazing to see all this local talent that you don't hear on the radio necessarily. Some of them have been on the radio, mostly CBC or whatever. I met Julian Taylor a few times. The CBC loves Julian Taylor. He's a fantastic songwriter. He was in a band back in the day called Staggered Crossing. If you remember, from like the early 2010s, I think, something like that. And so yeah, absolutely great local talent. And actually took it upon myself to develop my own. I have a Spotify playlist called Toronto Indie. So the first I in indie is an exclamation mark. So Toronto Indie on Spotify, and it's basically like local artists that I'm a fan of, like, and they're great songs, and there's a mix on there of folky stuff, of hard rock, of piano ballads, of whatever
I'm
artists
sure
that I
the
know
audience
are
would be
coming up.
super interested in your playlist, so we're gonna add it to the description.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
People
For
can
sure.
go listen to some of these artists as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
sure,
we
for sure.
and we are very, or at least me and Yaver are very curious as to how Nabil is doing in his own songwriting, and what you thought of him when you
Guys,
first.
they're trying to just throw me under the bus.
It's a good bus. I'll tell you, I've known Nabil for a few years, and the growth he's experienced over the last few years, just like I didn't see him, of course, for a few years during the pandemic, and then I saw him again at open mic, and I remember saying, as I was saying to Nabil, like, your singing voice has just taken a massive increase. Your confidence, especially on stage, has just grown enormously. I didn't even know Nabil played bass, and we were at an open mic at the function bar, and I just saw him playing bass. And I remember Nabil saying to me, "Is like, this is how I learned how to play bass. Just show up at open mics and start playing bass." Like, that's awesome. Like, he's got such a go get 'em attitude. It's just like, go out and do it, and that's
Yeah.
what a lot of this is just go out and do it.
Yeah, just have fun.
Just have fun with it. Chances are the audience is not even going to know if you made a mistake. I come off stage sometimes. I'm in a band too, and come off stage and say, like, that was a train wreck. I made so many mistakes. And everyone in the audience is like, hey, great job.
Yeah. It's kind of like
idea.
showmanship, right? Like, you have to show that sell to the audience that they're having a good time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been said before that music, maybe dance is the other one. Music is one of the only art forms that exists through time. A painting sort of sits there and it's beautiful and whatever, but it doesn't operate through time. So time is very essential in music, especially when you're performing with other people. This is something I learned in school band in high school. You make a mistake, you just barrel through it as if the mistake never happened. Forget about it, escape it from your mind. It never happened. Just keep on going, because you're playing with other people. You can't stop.
Right.
Right. And so that's why a lot of mistakes get kind of brushed over because you can't dwell on it. You just have to
Yeah.
keep on barreling through. The song will continue whether you made a mistake or not. You
The
just
show
need to
must go
catch
on,
up,
right?
and the show must go on no matter what. Right. So that's the most essential thing you learn.
It's interesting you mentioned time because one of my questions was if Nabil gets around to building that time machine and you could go back in time and what advice would you give yourself based on all the accomplishments and the challenges you face? What advice would you give yourself if you could go back in time? I don't know, 30 years ago.
30 years ago, let's see. I guess, I mean, some of the things I've learned over the time, okay, from a songwriting perspective, I wish I would have been more interested in singing. I wish I would have recognized that melody is king, right? Because I was obsessed with being a musician before, and just playing like I wasn't playing classical music necessarily, but that sort of thing. And I think if I'd given those two things a little more weight, then I might be a better songwriter performer today. Oh, so that's something I would give advice to myself back then. The other thing is yeah, like I was saying before, just get out there and do it, and really meet with people, right? Example, I I also have I have a meager home studio, but given that I've worked with clients on the odd occasion, it's not a full-time, even a part-time thing for me, or consistent necessarily, but I've worked with clients, developing their productions, like recording them, filling out the songs and making them more robust and adding instrumentation and things like that, and recording an album and releasing it and the whole kit and caboodle. I had a website way back in the day for my production studio services that detailed all the things that I can do and how I can help you. Did I get any clients through that thing? Not a chance. Where did all my clients come from? Going to the meetup, meeting people there, talking to them, developing friendships, getting, interfacing, networking. So, I mean, I've heard this before too, that music is a people business. You're not
Get
going to
out.
get, I don't know what kind of, like you're not going to get very far if you're an ass, right?
Yeah.
You got
Throw
to
yourself out there.
yeah, throw yourself out there and be a nice person is the other key thing.
Yeah.
Circling back to the podcast,
Mhm.
I'm curious if you have any tips for us as a young and upcoming podcast, and you've got so much more experience than us.
Mhm.
What would be your top 3 tips for us in terms of making the podcast better? What should we focus on? How should we go about it?
I think I listen to some other podcasts. I'm not deep on podcasts, but I do listen to some other podcasts, and it really kind of depends what kind of podcast you want. Like Song Talk Radio, our podcast, we go into it almost completely unprepared. We ask the guests to submit their material before. So we have an introduction, we have a promo photo, we have an MP3, and we have a lyric sheet. So we can listen to the song, sometimes it's just a few days in advance when they submit their material. So we can listen to the song, we can think about, the types of things we want to talk about with a songwriter on it. And I used to like print out the lyric sheet and make little notes on it before the show, so I would be more prepared as to what to talk to the guest about. Nowadays, I just listen to it a couple times. I'll make some mental notes and go on, because I know it can be a little bit unpredictable the way the conversation is going to go, and you just gotta go with the flow. And I've always been very much a person where if I do a presentation or something, I need to plan the bejesus out of it, and every slide and everything has to be down to the nth degree, and I know exactly how it's going to proceed, and I'm not much for spontaneity. However, on this podcast, it's been a little bit loose in terms of let the conversation go where it wants to go. Now, that being said, I also do appreciate podcasts that are heavily edited and heavily focused, and the story is very clear, and and it's very planned out to the nth degree, whether true crime or just science or something. I've listened to some science podcasts too sometimes. And it really depends what you want, but I think the most valuable advice I can offer is just be clear about what the podcast is and what listeners can expect. Like when we say songwriters talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting, that's pretty much what you get.
That's it. Yeah.
Right. So if you have your tagline and you have your, you're sort of the one line elevator pitch of the podcast. Anyone tuning into it, is that what they're getting, or are they getting something else?
Basically, you're saying settle down with an audience that you want to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other weird thing about our podcast is that, and we're very clear about this too, with publicists, with everybody that we talk to, is that it's very niche. When we started it, of course, I shared it with my wife, and she's not a songwriter, and she's like, sounded good. I had no idea what you guys were talking about. I'm like, that's okay. You're not our target demographic. You're not
the
someone
audience
we're actually reaching out to. We're reaching out to other songwriters, and it is very niche. And we actually like it that way because, especially my co-host Phil, he was like, I can't stand those general podcasts or radio shows where they talk to songwriters about random, inspiration and what your drug addiction was and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
He the way he always put it is that we're a gardening show except for songwriters. Like we want to get into the little nitty gritties and things about actually how song works. So we get it. It's not for everybody, certainly, but
but you have to find a niche.
Yeah, you have to find your niche and go with it.
I just wanted to end the podcast on that note and just say, thank you, Neel, for sharing your ideas and being so open and transparent. We love that with our guests.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We were all three immigrants that kind of came together to voice and to empower others in our community with any speakers who really want to just come and share their stories. And so, we're starting off that way and we're finding our voice, and you're definitely right. We need to find that niche, and as we grow, we're going to continue to drill down on that and hope that we can motivate and inspire other leaders and people in our community. So for anyone listening, yeah, definitely. So for anyone listening, stay tuned for better listens. Subscribe to Neel's Song Talk podcast. We've got everything in the description, all the links that we talked about. Please do support us, subscribe, like, comment. Let us know what we're doing well, what we're doing wrong. As we talked about in these conversations, feedback is key. So we look forward to hearing from our communities and leveraging those, just as Neel has also done in his to grow his podcast and community. So yeah, until next time, stay tuned for more fun.
Thanks again, Neel.
You betcha. Thanks a lot for having me. Really, really had fun.
See you guys next time.